So I saw online on your Instagram you're doing a bit of compost moving.
I am doing it. God, you're stalking me on my Instagram. I spent the weekend moving a compost bin. Yeah.
Compost bin. Well, so that reminded me, and I've just read an article.
Can I just say, by the way, if anybody wants to move a compost bin,
don't.
It's flipping hard work.
I just saw a news article saying that you can now be composted when you die. So up until
in my compost bin?
not in your compost bin.
It's full.
In a special compost bin.
Right.
You can be composted. So rather than being burnt or buried.
Isn't that what they call a coffin?
No, it's an actual thing that you get.
What do you think happens to dead bodies when they go into a coffin?
Yeah, but it's not a coffin. You go into like a washing machine type thing with a load of soil. And then a month later you come out.
Oh no! That conjures up images of worms and stuff.
Yeah, and you can be planted. You can be taken home and used.
No, hang on, this is too far. I'm not sure this is suitable for a family-friendly audience.
Should we try another one? Intrigue me.
Yeah, what it would do. How do they market something like that? It's
a growing thing, apparently. It's eco-friendly.
See what we did there?
It's an eco-friendly way if people are concerned about the other methods of
Well, I've heard about cardboard coffins and that sort of thing. But not a washing machine constructed thing that accelerates the process.
Yeah. In a month you could be. So yeah, it just reminded me of that, and I thought.
You're right. When I was doing my moving of the compost bin.
Well, the two things. I just read the article. I thought, oh yeah, I remember someone talking about compost over there.
The bit about my story, as you gathered, is that when I dug out the compost, underneath layers and layers and layers of soil, I found 2 for sale boards, which were from when we bought our house over 20 years ago, and they were as good as new.
Plastic doesn't decompose. I spent many years trying to work on decomposing plastics. It doesn't work.
Why I put them under there, thinking they might compose, assuming that's what I did do, but no.
Was it not just a base?
Maybe I put it as a base. It was 20 years ago. I don't know.
20 years ago.
I've slept since then.
Yeah.
Anyway, yes, I'm going to start stalking your Instagram now, see what you get up for the weekend.
Oh, I've got a private account, I think.
Okay. Probably just as well. There'll be a reason for that. I think it's time to do a podcast.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the SME Growth Podcast from Wellmeadow. We try and come up with some interesting or useful topics each week to talk about for our merry band of listeners who are all either owners or managers of small and medium-sized enterprises looking to grow. And as ever, I have with me Richard, my partner in crime.
Hello.
Both a bit husky this week, both on the back of, in varying degrees, of a bit of a cold or something.
Yeah, but we struggle on.
So we're going Barry White, full Barry White for today's
the
episode.
Listeners, yes.
I'm sure Pete can post-process us and give us these perfect
give us a bit of treble
voices. Yeah, up the treble, Pete.
We need a bit of treble.
So what we're going to talk about this week, I look back through the list of 66 episodes that we've done so far, and I couldn't believe it. Not one of them have we talked chairing board meetings. And yet in our company's 20-year history, that's what we've done most of. We've chaired over 3,000 board meetings for 100 companies, and we've never once done a podcast on it. All being a non-exec director, and we're non-exec directors for those companies. I could have sworn we've done something like that before, but I look back through and we haven't.
I think we did some on like risk registers and things like that.
Maybe we've done bits of the board meeting.
I think we started, but we're easily distracted. That's our problem.
What did you say? Who are you again? And what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, one of the most visited parts of our website and downloaded assets is to do with board meetings. Yep. We have something called the Good Board Meeting Guide, which is a book, albeit an ebook, available from all good Wellmeadow websites. So you come and download it. And we get a steady trickle of people in there downloading it. Now, I'm not under any illusions. I'm sure some people are doing a management course and want to know about board meetings and they're just using it for a bit of research. But we do have an interesting number of sign-ups that then follow up with a discussion. And I happened to have one of those yesterday, which triggered the thought to say, why don't we revisit the topic in a podcast, talk about chairing of board meetings. So as I've already said, we've done thousands of these things. And you do some and I do some. We've done some together.
Do some together.
We used to do double heading. But nowadays you do a certain set of companies and I look after a different set of companies, and that's the way it is.
Yep.
So it's amazing to think, I don't know how we got into that. In fact, most people, when I tell them that's what I do, they say, how'd you get into that?
How did you get into it? I can't
You can't remember the story.
How did it start?
It started out, I suppose, when I first developed the consulting career, post my factory management career. And I went into companies trying to effect change. And like lots of consultants, they find that whilst the advice may be very worthy, it's not the same as getting change to even take place, let alone stick. And in my analysis of what was causing the problem, it was lack of top-level leadership and commitment to the change. So I followed the chain of command up and asked to sit in on a board meeting on one of our clients at the time. And having come from the corporate world before and been in my fair share of senior meetings, I was shocked to find the quality of this particular SME so-called board meeting. And I said quietly to the MD afterwards, do you think we could do that again next month a bit differently? And how about I facilitate it for you or chair it for you? Anyway, one thing led to another. And beforehand, I started saying it to all of new clients that came on board. I said, by the way, if I'm going to come in here, I'd strongly encourage, if not almost insist on the fact that we do have a board meeting, even if you don't have them at the moment, and that I'll do you a favour, I'll chair it for you, and I'll manage all the paraphernalia around it, agenda, board packs, minute taking, action chasing, and so on. And therein was born an idea.
I think it's interesting, isn't it, that quite a few companies say they have board meetings, but they range from we're the board that are just chatting every day, and that's sort of enough of a meeting because we know what's going on.
We don't need a meeting, we talk every day. Yeah,
to the sort of Friday afternoon down the pub, this is the board meeting.
Yeah, almost done as a joke.
Yeah.
The directors happen to be together. Okay, we're holding a pint. Let's call it a board meeting. We could put it on expenses then.
And just kind of, and then everything in between. And it's having that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's worse. They're not having it at all, and therefore you're missing out on even trying to have certain discussions, or kidding yourself that you are having board meetings because you get together with the board and it's a meeting, but it's not prepared for. There's no real notes taken from it. You end up repeating the same discussions and having the same crises over and over again. Maybe there's at least more dignity in the admitting that you're not doing it at all.
Yeah.
Well, I'm pretending.
Have you ever come across a board of one? What happens then?
Yeah, I have. Well, and often people say, well, I don't need board meetings, it's only me. It's okay, well, you've got two hats. If it's only you, you're probably the main executive manager in the business. That's taken for granted. But you also have a responsibility, especially if you're the only director, you have a responsibility to the company. Yeah. Where do you think about that? Do you ever sit down and challenge yourself, put a different hat on and say, how am I doing? How are the accounts? What's the risk register looking like? What's our strategy? What's the makeup of the board? Should it be just me? Should I have somebody else? And so that's, I suppose, where the non-exec director bit of what we do, where that comes in, where companies will pay an annual sort of retainer to have us attend regularly and be alongside the business owner, challenging, prompting, probing. That
Add some formality, bit of critical friend type.
Yeah. Well, you do that. I mean, you travel wide, don't you, for the various boards that you sit on?
Yeah.
And I'm sure you feel the same. It's often the critical friend bit. I mean, how many times you've come back from board meetings saying today was a really tough meeting, but not because of the business at hand. It was just someone on the board was having personal crisis. Yeah,
there is that, isn't there? There's the personal dynamic sometimes that it's almost easier for an outsider to facilitate a meeting than, you're not. It's not that you're not emotionally invested, because I think part of the way that we've been successful is that we are quite emotionally invested.
Yeah, you do. You can't help it, can you?
Because you're effectively with owner-managed businesses, particularly, it's like another child, isn't it? So in many cases, so you're there almost watching it grow and take its first steps or go through adolescence.
Well, for some of these companies, we've been with some of these companies for nearly 20 years.
Yeah.
Long-standing. Some of the very first clients we took on, until recent acquisitions, we were still working with those at board level, chairing the board meetings, and it's hard. You've been to weddings sometimes. You've been around as children have been born and even grown up. You've been around a lot, but because you're only going in once or twice a month, you still retain quite a high degree of that outsideness that non-execs have, which other members of the permanent board probably don't have if they're executive anyway.
Yeah, you don't have to get in amongst the muck and bullets so much, do you? You're able to.
No, and you're not responsible for a department. Yeah. And I think that's the problem that a lot of small business directors have, is that they've got these 2 or 3 different roles. They've got to do a bit of a job because it's all hands to the pump. They're also a manager of a department, probably, if they're director, and they're a director of the company. And they all require very different forms of thinking.
Different hats.
There might also be shareholders,
Yeah.
which is a fourth hat again.
Yeah. And to switch between those modes takes quite a bit of deliberate thinking, doesn't it?
It's hard to do in the same meeting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Switching mindset.
Yeah.
So I think where we've got involved with companies and done this work that we both do, I think some of the benefits come from either making the meeting happen at all,
Yep.
adding a degree of formality, and the fact that an outsider's coming along means you don't shift the meeting, you're probably more likely to prepare for it. I've never found people larking about in the meetings or disrespecting the process. They've always been very professional, and I think that's part of having an outsider there. You can imagine a firm that's got quite a laugh about sort of good-humoured culture because they all know each other quite well. That maybe that would bleed across into a board meeting type environment, more serious meeting if there wasn't an outsider there. You wouldn't do that if the bank manager turned up for a meeting. Yeah. So it's adding that sort of thing. So the meetings happen, there's a bit more decorum about them, a bit more formality, the prepare, the follow-up.
Structure,
having all of that. So that works very well. But of course, we also bring along, almost by accident, our outsideness. You can't but. That's why we're different. That's what makes us different. And because we do it for lots of other firms at the same time, rather than just being the non-exec of one company, it means we are always able to say, oh yeah, I've seen this the other week. I was having this discussion somewhere else.
We're like little bees cross-pollinating.
We cross-pollinate. Give yourself a little bee.
We confidentially cross-pollinate ideas. And I think
I've got this image of you now in some sort of yellow and black stripy jumper with some
I can see the short now. This is meadow.
Pete's going to have a field day with that one.
But no, and I think like a great example for this is probably during COVID times, wasn't it? When no one really had a clue what to do.
Yeah, it's true.
And because we were just talking to so many different companies, it was like, okay, we had this situation, we did like this, and then you're on the Zoom call to someone else.
How does this furlough thing work? This brand new thing, and what do we do with this? And
So I mean, there's loads of other examples like that. In all sorts of, in every area of a business, but that's one that kind of springs to mind as just an obvious one where really, that cross-pollination was very useful. But
so I think it's important to distinguish, what's the non-exec bit mean, the net of Ned, if you like, a non-exec chairman. It's very clearly we don't have any responsibility either in the business for running a department or doing a job, but quite importantly, we don't have any decision-making powers.
Yeah.
So some companies have non-exec directors that are given decision-making powers and they're full members of the board. The way we tend to do it is more what legally they call in attendance at the meeting. So in a board meeting, you've got two classes of people there. You're either present or you're in attendance, and the people who are present have a voting right. They've got voting capacity, and the in attendance people are there by invitation, but they have no decision-making power at all.
Yeah.
So you've got to be careful, and lots of people in this sort of situation will be aware of the concept of de facto directors, or what used to be called shadow directors, because we are not there to stand in for another director.
Yeah.
We can't either actually or be seen to be making decisions. We're there giving advice, and all decisions end up being taken by the actual company directors.
As per clause 14 of our engagement letters.
You've revised our terms and conditions.
I think it's clause 14. Might be.
Very good.
But yeah, that's an important distinction.
So it's an important distinction. We're not responsible for a department, which makes us non-executive, but in our case, we're also not formally company's house directors.
Yeah.
We come on board as a non-exec board chairman, if you like, small c chairman, rather than big C chairman, as in the role that's called a chairman. So we bring that outsideness, that objective view, and that cross-pollination like the bees flitting around, and a fresh perspective. Sometimes going out of a business for a few weeks before you come back in again allows you to ask the daft questions, whereas everybody else has been in that sort of boiling a frog scenario where things have just gradually changed every day, and then a new situation is there. You come in and think, well, how do we get up here? How do we decide to do that?
I think you can bring a level of energy in as well that, if you've been up against it as a business and everything, it's almost the familiarity breeds contempt type of thing. Coming in fresh, you can almost bring that. Well, why can't we do it that way? Type of thinking, or let's just. And
I was challenged on that yesterday in this conversation I referred to. That how do you overcome the fact that you don't have 20 years of history with this company? For a new company you're starting on, obviously. So how are you able to overcome that objection to an idea which says, you don't understand, we've tried that before. And as I very honestly said, I've never had that. No one has ever said to me, you can't do that, we've tried that before. I just don't think that comes across very well anyway, whether you know someone or not.
Yeah.
If someone's come up with an idea, think it through in positive terms. Well, what would make that work? Not what would make that not work, or what are the limits to which that would work, rather than just dismissing something out of hands of, you don't understand. If you're in that sort of relationship, the whole thing isn't going to last very long. You need to be welcoming the idea that someone's coming in and through their best endeavors with a professional mindset are trying to help.
Yeah.
And if they want to know, it's a reasonable question.
And maybe that sort of thing plays to some of our backgrounds as well. So my background is scientist, your background is engineer. We both studied business in various forms as well.
Yeah.
But having that kind of mindset, problem-solving mindset, bringing that into a board as well, rather than it just being kind of a deep, kind of narrow expertise, is much more of our style is much more problem-solving.
Yeah, exactly.
Experimental.
We're not holding ourselves out to be sector specialists in anything. And some companies look for chairmen, chairwomen, chairs who are like that. And really all they're after is the black book of contacts and some hackneyed rules of thumb for how it's worked before. Whereas I think our approach is much more generically applicable. Yeah. Because like you say, we're more of a problem-solving mindset. And also we challenge opinions if we can't see how that opinion's been arrived at. And I remember a number of conversations we've both been at where you challenge an MD who's very forthrightly holding out to a view that is this, because or and you just ask the innocent question: where'd you get that from? Where'd your facts come? What experience have you got? How did you come to that view? Oh, well, it just is, isn't it? And then immediately when people hear themselves saying that, they retract it. Oh, well, what I mean is, well, maybe I don't know, or maybe we should test it. And unless they've been challenged like that before, then some of these sort of almost myths that get built up within a firm, they're just allowed to perpetuate because no one ever asks why. I
think as well, maybe it's kind of adjacent to that is you can have some very forthright characters in a board meeting, but at the same time you can have directors that don't really say much as well.
Oh, you get a lot of both, yeah.
And so actually having an outside person in there to say, right, Jim, what do you think of this? And you almost invite them into the conversation as a way of facilitating.
Well, that's just good meeting facilitation technique, isn't it? Which I think is a lot easier to do when you're not emotionally involved in the subject. You can still keep an eye on the time, the agenda, the participation of different people, body language, whether someone's subject is building on the previous one or whether they're trying to go off to a tangent. You can cope with all those thoughts in your head and maybe at the same time take the minutes like we do and present the material. Whereas I think when you've got an angle, you've got an axe to grind, an opinion, you're always watching out for whether someone's just said something that's either with you or against your point of view, and have you got to counter this? We're not burdened by any of that. Yeah. We're there for process.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we come to the fore. And I do feel some sympathy, a lot of sympathy for the business owners that bring us in who are very, very familiar with the other members of the board. Family firms are a classic example of this, probably related to them all. Either immediate family or brothers-in-law, sisters-in-law, sons-in-law, that type of thing, or even just people who've been around a long time. I think the owners, when they're trying to chair that sort of meeting, find it very difficult then to properly probe. Yeah, you can almost imagine the response back is, "Come on, you did that 5 years ago."
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I did. So whereas from the outside, we're not burdened with we've been around here a long time.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to see them on Christmas Day either. And those types of things. It's kind of, you've got that level
and you could be fairly robust. Someone there's nothing wrong with a good, healthy debate, but sometimes you don't want to be having Sunday lunch with them as well in case the debate rolls on. You need that separation. So that's fair enough. So I think that's good. So it does enhance the dynamics. I think it helps the decision-making process. But once again, focusing on the process itself rather than the decision. Are we going around in circles here? All I've heard for the last 5 minutes is repeats of what we said before, or are we getting closer to a solution? Do we need to take this offline? And sometimes people get so, focused on an argument, the red mist comes down, or they get so passionate, they actually forget that we're not getting any closer. Everybody's just shouting their different views at each other, and we're not really reaching any form of...
I think as well you can have that, there's a couple of companies I can think of where it's not maybe just in one meeting, but you can have the same discussion about, normally it's about a particular individual, but you tend to have it every single board meeting.
Yeah.
And then after about 2 or 3 board meetings, it's like, right, okay, we spend 30 minutes every board meeting talking about the same person here.
Yeah.
Who's grabbing the nettle on this? Yeah. Who's, no one person should take up that amount of time within a board meeting context.
And people are almost enjoying having a moan.
And they just want to kick the can down the road till the next meeting. They don't want to deal with the problem. And I think that's where again, having that impartiality, having that objectiveness, you can stand there and say, right, okay, well, who is dealing with this then? What are we doing? We're talking about the same stuff all the time here, guys. So
it's policing how much time we spend on each thing, which is just the agenda, managing the agenda, and knowing when to let subjects run off agenda, because actually that's a fruitful line of inquiry that perhaps wouldn't have happened otherwise. So let's see where that goes for a bit. But then knowing when to stop that or not let it start if it isn't going to get us to the finish line of a useful board meeting.
And we have a sort of set way that we run agendas, don't you? So we talked about a bit how if we're running board meetings for a company, we will try and take control of the agenda in terms of structure. So we start out with kind of formalities, governance section. Yeah,
the sort of boring bits. And I bet you that's mostly what doesn't happen in internally run meetings, because people just don't see the point why. I mean, I wonder how many business owners and listeners to this realise that it's a legal requirement to record all decisions made by directors and to keep those records for 10 years. I bet you if you ask most in like a multi-choice quiz, they might guess that you should take minutes, but only of, like say, an AGM or something.
Yeah.
But small companies don't need to have an AGM. Companies Act doesn't require an AGM anymore. You can ask for one, so shareholders can ask for one. But then taking the minutes, even if they guessed, probably 3 years, 7 years, it's 10 years you have to keep them for. And not just every conversation that you record as a board meeting, but all decisions taken by the directors. And the hard thing is in a small firm, is that decision I've just taken, have I taken that as a director? Or have I taken it as a manager or just as an employee or is it a day-to-day? So that's why having someone like us coming in and saying, oh, hang on a minute, that sounds like a director sort of decision to me. I think we should record that.
Yeah.
To the point where we've added over the last several years now an agenda item, which is to mop up all the decisions the directors have taken since the last board meeting.
Yeah.
Once again, most boards don't record that. They just assume that the only decisions ever get taken in board meetings, which is obviously nonsense.
Yeah.
You've got to mop up that as well. So the formalities bit, you've got to do the conflicts of interest. You've got to make sure that the meeting is quorate and properly called and all that. It all sounds very boring.
And it's just on that point around decisions, there will be most likely things in your articles or shareholder agreements which may even stipulate which decisions need board approval.
Yeah. So and even beyond, which ones of those need shareholder approval.
Yeah.
And when you ask members, where's your shareholder agreement? I think it's in here somewhere. Oh, we had one about 20 years ago. And all the shareholders have changed since then. So you're right, the reserved matters list, as they call it, the things that need to be approved either by the board or kicked up to shareholders for more of a general meeting, a shareholders meeting.
And then one thing that we put at the start of the agenda in this section, which does throw some people, I have some meetings where people still struggle to get to terms with that, is the any other business at the start of the meeting.
Because everyone else has it at the end.
At the end.
Wrong place.
And so, you could get to the end of a meeting and all of a sudden someone says, any other business? Oh, well, yeah, our key employees decided to just hand the notice in to me just before I came to the meeting. So,
well, thanks for saving that to the end.
But do you not think that needs a little bit more air in the meeting? By that time, the meeting as well, everyone's looking at their watches, right? It's time to get on to the next meeting or go home or whatever it is. So by moving it to the start of the meeting, anything then that really does need discussion has at least got
you've got a chance.
You've got an option.
At least as the chairperson, then you can think through your agenda and say, right, okay, that sounds quite important. Let's make it a separate agenda item, or let's discuss it now because it needs a 2-minute airing and a decision, but it doesn't need much more. Yeah. Or we could say, well, why don't we just pick that up under the finance section or the people section, and you can park it. But it stops then you getting to the end and someone throwing the grenade in and saying, one last thing. By the way.
We just lost a major customer.
So you're right, there's this first of the 3 sort of main components of the board meeting called the formalities and governance sort of stuff, approving the last minutes and those sorts of things. And then you move on to the middle bit, which is more the reports.
Yeah.
So what's happened next month? What's going to happen next? So what's happened last month? What's going to happen next month? And what key decisions do we need to bring to the table?
Yeah.
So that's arguably the lion's share of the meeting. It needs a lot of prep, and quite often you don't get the prep.
Yeah.
And that's where we try and help with that. We try and get people to limit their preparation to a 1-pager.
Yep.
And along those headlines, what's happened, what's going to happen, what do we need to decide?
Yep.
And that's kind of it, really. And it's really hard to get some directors to limit themselves to 1 page. They'll give you a 10, 20, 30-page PowerPoint with chapter and verse of this, that, and the other.
Yeah, no one's going to read it.
And you lose your message.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got a key thing to get across and to decide, and it's buried in a slide 25 of a 30-slide deck, then you've
it's
lost
almost like bringing your elevator pitch to the board, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it's like But
in a much more I suppose elevator pitch gives the impression that it's more positive than salesy. I think this is much more honest. And I think as a director, even when you're responsible for the department, let's say marketing or design or whatever, you've got to be able to say this has been a bad month, as much as this has been a good month. And then the other directors have got to not jump on and all pile on and say, well, I've been fine, you've let us down again. As a board, now you're all wearing different hats. Okay, so you're representing, one corner of the board, if you like. We've just seen a department that hasn't done very well in the month. What are we collectively going to do about it?
Yeah.
And if anything's going wrong, it's the responsibility of someone in this room.
Yeah.
Everyone in the company reports to someone in this room. And they're only doing what we collectively have asked them to do.
Yeah.
So, and that, even giving that little speech sometimes wakes people up a little bit. So we can't just assume that there's no one's fault here.
Yeah.
Or even if it's not in our control, the fact that it's happened, it's definitely our responsibility to react to it.
Yeah.
And that's what running a company is about, isn't it? It's deciding when to decide and when not to decide.
Yeah, and I think, again, as well, the format of those reports. So we did a whole lot of work around, what do we call it? KPI viewer, accounts viewer, particularly on the accounts, but it could equally be applied to other areas. But just what we were finding was that, particularly around accounts, finance director would come in with a big list of numbers and tables and data and spreadsheets, all good stuff. But if you're not familiar with looking for where the gross margin line is or where a particular overhead line is, then you sort of spend half the time just sort of gazing around. So what we'd said, okay, well, let's put this into sort of a graphical format and try and tell the story all the way from lead to cash by looking at month by month, actual versus last year versus target versus budget versus rebudget, that type of thing. But then also looking at the cumulative picture. So you might have just had a bad month this month, but actually year to date, you're way ahead. And so it's. And
I wish there was. I wish people could see this, because even when we're videoing it, we haven't got it up on the screen. But you're right, that pair of graphs for each measure. Whereas on the left hand side, we have the monthly amounts depicted as a bar against the line, that's the target, and on the right the cumulative. So it gives you a very clear story over the course of two graphs there. How are we doing compared to other months? And no matter whether we've just had a good month or a bad month, over the course of this year, are we on track or not, and how does it look compared to last year? So very powerful. And that has turned out to be one of the major innovations, isn't it, that we bought. Stop reviewing the accounts in the traditional finance director's format, tabulated numbers, lots of columns with differences and variances and all sorts, and put them into graphs. And that lead to cash thing. Open out this discussion. It's not just about the accounts. That's just the middle bit. You've got a load of stuff that happens before accounts, which are lead indicators. So number of inquiries we've had, number of quotes that we've issued, order intake. They're all numbers that you can measure, quite hard measures, have targets against them. And they're pretty good predictors of what your financial performance will be like down the road. And then after you've got to the net profit element, don't forget the balance sheet stuff. Where's the working capital going? Are debtors going up and down? What's our creditor position? Where's stock going? And then most importantly, cash. Where's the cash going from all of this? And in fact, I was in a meeting this morning where exactly that comment came up. We've just entered a little dip. Sales are going to be low for a couple of months. Then we're expecting a bonanza summer starting in about June time. Everyone thinks we can see through it because the P&L cumulatively will look okay. But as everybody knows, if they've been there, a declining company actually does okay for cash. You carry on collecting your debtors, you don't have the creditors, you don't have suppliers to pay. And it's only when it starts growing again, you suddenly run out of money. You got to pay for all these supplies. You haven't got the money coming in, debtors go up, and you run out of cash. So cash flow forecasting isn't needed all the time, but there are times when it's absolutely critical.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things where, and again, it depends on the business and the mix of products and things, but I think with some of so I do some legal clients, you can pretty much nail on what the average matter is for a particular firm. And so looking at the number of new matters that come in with a 3 to 4 month run rate, you can pretty much, just by looking at the new matters, once everyone knows those numbers, so if you can kind of drill into everybody, right, average matter is 1,500 quid or whatever it is, look at those, we can work out then what the billing's going to be, what the cash is going to be in 3 to 4 months time, and we've got a dip here, so we're going to have a cash problem here, without having to go. It's quite a high level cash flow forecast. I mean, even cash flow forecasting is it's fag packet cash flow forecasting, but the one thing that's right about a forecast is going to be wrong, right? So it's
the only thing that will be right.
But it gives you that, at least everyone sitting around the table then has got that kind of right. Maybe we've got to try and do something.
Yeah.
We've got a bit of a heads up on it.
But even spotting those rules of thumb, those averages, that's something that we as the outsiders can ask those questions. And maybe because we're having to cope with lots of different sets of accounts and different business models, we need a quick way of being able to get a grip on it without having to be familiar with a very bizarre way of presenting the accounts in certain ways. It reminds me of a story, actually, that John, who may be listening, is always able to predict what his supermarket shopping bill will be each week, astonishingly accurately, by just counting the number of items that go in the trolley. And he knows what their average cost per item is every week.
I do that. I love look at that.
You don't, do you?
Well, I don't do it maybe as religiously, but I do try and look at the number of items and divide it by the total and think, am I getting to like £1 an item? Is my
£1 an item? Lincoln, hey, that's cheap. You're a little shopper.
Aldi.
Sorry.
Love an Aldi shop.
I'm not knocking it.
Anyway, but the third bit of the meeting. So we've done the first bit was governance
and formalities, then the reports and the decision making.
And the third bit is about forward-looking strategic projects.
Now, people get the wrong idea about this sometimes because we say the third bit is the strategic bit. They think that's when we're going to design the strategy. And there's no board meeting I've ever been in where you've designed a very good strategy. Yeah. You might come up with a tweak to one, but on the whole, you're reviewing the strategy. So the point is your monthly review, that middle section we talked about, probably around the accounts, the KPIs, the measures on customer satisfaction, production efficiency, that type of stuff. The third bit is looking at how are those multi-month projects going. Maybe this year we're going to break into a new market or develop a new product. So how's that going so far? And so having a quick review of that project, stopping it becoming a full-on strategic review of that project, but just like marketing or engineering or whoever else will give a summary of their department, whoever owns that project needs to give a summary of that project's progress. And is it running into any roadblocks? Are we making project progress? Do we need any extra funding or change direction or whatever? And I found universally boards really struggle with that bit. Their energy levels drop towards the end of the meeting and they don't like to prepare for it. Quite often it's because they haven't done any work on it. And we've had this discussion before. How much of your time as a director, manager, employee should you spend on the director bit each week? And even if you guess at that number at 10%, that's still half a day a week. And that's a useful device I throw all the time in our boards. We've not made any progress on this strategic action. You're the director in charge of XYZ. If you agree 10% of your time, you should at least be doing some director type stuff outside of this board meeting. That's half a day a week. We've had 4 half days since the last one of these monthly board meetings. You've had 2 days, therefore, to do something. Nothing's happened. Come on, we're not taking this seriously. Either let's kill off the action, get someone else to do it, or you step down as a director. Maybe the words don't quite come out like that, but that's kind of the decision you need people to be mulling over. Okay, so they're the 3 bits of it. Now, we talked before about presenting materials and taking the minutes at the same time. Something we both do is to take the minutes in our board meetings. And partly that's the power of the pen. You get a chance to write down how it's been recorded. You can also steer the discussion a bit to say, look, what am I going to write down here, everybody? We're all arguing. We've spent 10 minutes on this. I want to write a sentence which summarizes all that lot. What am I saying? The board disagreed fundamentally on it. That's not going to be very useful. So what can I write down that we've just agreed on? Or what's the statement of the position? And so you use the fact that you've got the keyboard. And the other thing we both do is to present the minutes live on a projector, or these days more often on a large screen. And so everybody has seen the minutes take shape. And I make the point to everybody, these are our minutes. These are your minutes. And if you don't like what I'm typing, I'll change it. They're yours. Not just if I've misspelt something, but if I've got the right nuance, if I've captured the right actions, this is the only thing that will live on. And if you'll let me do that, and you're reading it as it's being written, you don't have to read the minutes of the meeting afterwards because you've read them as they were being written. You're already there.
And they should always be approved then the next time.
I don't need to wait for an approval cycle. That's it. And we use special software for it, which anybody who has downloaded our good board meeting guide will read a bit about. But that allows us to send the minutes out with the actions and everything from the moment we stand up. And we get to that moment, don't we, at the end of the meeting, we've agreed the next meeting date. I push the button, you push the button on the software. And before everybody stood up, their phones are all pinging and buzzing because the minutes are just arriving by email. That's a nice little PDF. So we're clever little bit of tech. But that discipline of having everything boxed into that meeting, make some decisions, and then ensure that in the next meeting, all of those decisions you made before get resurfaced There's no escape. You can't delete an action, can you, in our system?
No.
You can only close it off from within a meeting.
Yeah.
And it needs everybody to agree to it. So yeah, those disciplines really come to the fore. So that's the board meeting-y stuff. I guess we help out between times, and you turn into sort of chairman, facilitator to more of a coach, mentor between. You go back to somebody afterwards and say, look, come on, you agreed to do this thing. You need a hand, or I've seen that done elsewhere, or can I lend you a template that I've created based on all the other versions I've seen. So we do a bit of that as well. But that doesn't really cover some of the other non-exec roles that we get involved in. And maybe that's the subject of a different podcast.
Yeah.
But helping to recruit senior members of the team, dealing with the bank and securing funding, that type of thing, dealing with disputes. Managing shareholder relations is a biggie.
Yeah.
Sometimes all the shareholders are in the room, but sometimes they're not. And that's a key role that we can undertake, to be sort of a liaison between external non-exec
Sometimes the shareholders only get in the room when we're there. So
yeah, it's true. Yeah, succession planning. Sometimes telling massive. The owner that you haven't got a plan. You're looking to retire in a couple of years' time, and we need to put something in behind it. And also, I think importantly, holding the board themselves to account, because nobody likes marking their own homework. Well, maybe they like it, but it's not very effective. So sometimes being able to take a director to one side afterwards and just have a quiet word, say that probably wasn't your finest hour, or that was really good. Could you help someone else, mimic some of that behavior? And most importantly, taking the owner to one side, because no one ever challenges the owner except for us.
Yeah.
And we're able to say, come on up, this isn't really working, is it? What's the answer? And have an honest, critical friend type discussion.
Yeah.
So that's what we do. There you go. Board meetings in half an hour.
Done.
Go forth and improve your board meetings. So I would encourage anybody who's interested in finding out a bit more about that, go to our website, look at the insights page, and download that good board meeting guide.
Yeah.
And then give us a ring and we'll talk them through it. There's a few
packs full of field-tested tips.
Over 3,000 board meetings.
So
over nearly 20 years. Exactly. So hopefully people listening have got something useful out of all of that. And I'd be interested in people's views if they ring in. And we will do another podcast, I think, on the broader non-exec and the benefits of having a non-exec on your board.
Yeah, almost more the soft.
Yeah.
If the board meeting is the hard skills side
That's
of it.
That's where the rubber hits the road, yeah.
There's a huge amount of almost behind the scenes being that little bee.
Supporting the other directors. Cross-pollinating.
Cross-pollinating internally. It's the internal.
Yeah.
But that is an important role that we can play.
Yeah.
Is the kind of...
Well, we do, and we have for years. And yet so many smaller companies don't think it's appropriate or even available for them to have a non-exec. Yeah. And actually it's very, very valuable. Good.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. Good run around that. So thank you very much again for listening to another episode of the SME Growth Podcast. Every week we try and come up with something useful and interesting, and hopefully this week is no exception. Please pass on news of what we're doing to your business colleagues and contacts. Send them an email, tell them in the pub, maybe even follow and like our podcast wherever you get them from. And don't forget, you can also see all of our episodes on SMEgrowthpodcast.com, which is a website we've set up especially to hold all of our podcasts on there for you. So good luck with your business and see you next week.